Hello, viewers. My name is Joe. After attending The Ohio State University from 1978 to 1982, majoring in criminology and criminal justice, I worked at the historic Ohio State Reformatory, located in Mansfield, Ohio. Most people know the Reformatory as the location where the movie The Shawshank Redemption was filmed in 1994. The Reformatory is pictured in the foreground of this aerial photograph, which I found on the internet several years ago. I worked at the Reformatory as a correction officer from May 28, 1984 to December 30, 1990, when it was closed under federal court orders for being inhumanely overcrowded and unsanitary in violation of the inmates' constitutional rights. I can attest to the fact that working conditions were not much better than the inmate living conditions. I was one of, if not the, very last correction officer to transfer along with the last inmates to the then new neighboring state-of-the-art Mansfield Correctional Institution, also known as Mancy, shown here in the background and circled in red. I had been active and successful as a union steward, lead steward, and chief steward with the union that represented the correction officers and other staff at the Reformatory. I would later go on to become the chapter president at Mancy. During my time with the union, I had an unprecedented 85% success rate and won over $1 million in back pay from my coworkers who were wrongfully fired or suspended. I had proposed during labor management meetings that we transfer from the old to the new prison by seniority so that our seniority would remain intact. But management, particularly the warden, insisted on micromanaging our transfer and saw to it that I transferred on the very last day, having the effect of my having the lowest seniority when we transferred despite my years of service. I eventually won my seniority back through the successful resolution of my so-called frivolous grievance, which to this date governs seniority with employees who transfer from established prisons to new prisons within the first 60 days of operation. I am also remembered for being instrumental in getting the statewide grooming policy changed, allowing correction officers to have beards. The Reformatory was one of 2 prisons in the state of Ohio at the time which did not allow correction officers to have beards. During my time at Mancy, I eventually overcame management's dislike towards me and went on to become correction sergeant, correction lieutenant, and acting correction captain. This is my Reformatory photo identification card that was reissued to me in 1985. We were required to wear our IDs attached to the left pocket flap on our uniform shirt with a flimsy clip, and one windy day while I was assigned to the East Wall Tower, mine flew off and ended up in the sewer 25 feet below. I was reissued this one for free, but was told that if I ever lost it, I would have to pay $1 for another. So over 40 years later, I still have it. This is my Reformatory badge, or shield. I was badge number 134. In addition to it, I still have my bus driver hat and matching hat badge, as well as my Reformatory nightstick and handcuffs and other memorabilia and badges I've collected over the years at the various places I have worked. I hope my grandchildren don't fight over them after I've passed. I do believe I have enough stuff for each of them to have a few things to remember me by. One can find lots of photographs of the Reformatory on the internet. This is one of my favorites for 2 reasons. Number 1, because I actually knew Wally, who went up in a plane and took this picture and sold 5x7 copies to his coworkers for $5 each. And number 2, because my truck, the original red racer, is parked in the East Cell Block parking lot. Can you see it circled in red? It's hard to tell, but I know because it's where I parked every day. It was a 1978 Ford Courier pickup truck, which I purchased in 1981 and drove until 1988 or thereabouts. But I digress. Please enjoy this story. Today's story involves the four-floored furniture factory, or Double F, circled in red in the top right quadrant of this slide. Inmates at the Reformatory were taught a skill or trade by working at the furniture factory, making state office furniture, including desks, credenzas, bookcases, conference tables, chairs, and so on. When I worked at OSR during the 1980s, they mainly made office furniture out of veneer, similar to the desk pictured here, which I found on the internet. They also made matching credenzas and bookcases. They also made furniture for public schools. Back in the day, they made big old heavy 7-drawered oak desks, similar to this one, which I found on the internet. I remember my teachers having this style of desk when I attended elementary school in Granville, Ohio during the 1960s, which were no doubt made at the Reformatory. Some 30 years later, I impressed my coworkers when, as a substitute teacher working at one of the older Mansfield area schools, I told my fellow teachers how our desks were probably made at the OSR furniture factory, and then amazed myself when I pulled out a drawer and discovered that the inmate who had made the desk had signed his name and number on the underside of the drawer. I wish I would have saved his name and number so I could look him up on the internet. It would be interesting to find his picture and information. I also wouldn't mind having one of these desks for my home office. I cropped this close-up view of the Reformatory Furniture Factory from the previous slide and hereby apologize for being out of focus. Everyone who worked at the Reformatory knew about the infamous ghost nicknamed George, who supposedly haunted the furniture factory. I was told the following story about George shortly after I started working there. George was supposedly an inmate who worked at the furniture factory and was murdered by the guards, and his body was disposed of in the incinerator located between the textile shop and the powerhouse, circled in red in this photograph taken by my friend and former co-worker David. The official explanation for George's disappearance was that he escaped. We had several pictures of inmates on a clipboard in the control room who had escaped from the reformatory and were never captured. None of them were named George. To this day, the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections website lists 4 reformatory escapees who are still on the loose, and if still alive would be in their 90s or 100s. None of them are named George. This is why I previously stated that the alleged furniture factory ghost was nicknamed George, as opposed to there having actually been an inmate named George. Correction officers assigned to foot patrol during second and third shift hours were required to make rounds throughout the MPFF after the inmates who worked there were released for the day and sent back to their housing assignments. Second shift officers were required to make at least 1 patrol, while third shift officers were required to make 2 rounds in the empty building. The vast majority of correction officers and correction supervisors probably did not believe the story about an inmate named George being murdered or his ghost haunting the furniture factory, but everyone willingly participated in the perpetuation of the ongoing ghostly joke. Whenever anyone misplaced an item, such as an ink pen, for instance, the typical response was, "George must have taken it." But a third shift correction officer named Gary adamantly believed in George's existence. Gary regularly shared food from his lunchbox brought from home and set it out for George to eat, including items such as half his sandwich, cookies, a banana, and the like. On more than one occasion, I tried to explain to Gary that if spiritual entities such as ghosts really existed, they most likely did not require or need humanly food. But Gary insisted on feeding George anyways, almost as a peace offering. And Gary was quick to point out to me how the items he would leave for George on his first round, like cookies left for Santa Claus by children on Christmas Eve, would be eaten when he made his second check. This was enough to convince him that George really existed, when in reality, supervisors were sneaking into the furniture factory between Gary's checks and eating the food he had left for George. Everyone, except Gary, knew about this and enjoyed a good laugh behind Gary's back and at his expense. A retired corrections sergeant friend of mine, who was coincidentally named George, told me an interesting story involving the alleged Double F ghost who shared his name. According to George, in 1986, he was a correction officer assigned to the Northeast Tower, circled in red, which had a full view of the furniture factory, when he saw an inmate dressed in the khaki inmate uniform looking at him through a window. Only honor inmates assigned to the J dormitory were issued the khaki uniform, and honor inmates were not allowed inside the walls. According to George, it was a weekend or a holiday, and there shouldn't have been any inmates in the furniture factory, let alone honor inmates, so he called the captain's office. According to George, the captain sent another officer to the Northeast Tower to relieve him and instructed him to report to the captain's office. Upon George's arrival at the captain's office, located in the basement of the Hearst Memorial Infirmary building, circled in red in this photograph, which I obtained from the internet several years ago, the captain, who had worked at the Reformatory for many years, told George the correction officer the story behind George the ghost. According to George, the captain informed him that an inmate named George was murdered in the furniture factory wood storage room during the 1940s, and there had been alleged ghostly sightings of him ever since. The captain showed George an old logbook that was kept in the captain's office, which was filled with entries of alleged sightings of George, the ghost, and into which George, the correction officer, sighting was added. This was the first and only time I've ever heard of this logbook. I wonder what ever happened to it. I know that ghost hunters, paranormal researchers, and reformatory enthusiasts would love to get their hands on such a find, if it still exists. I would love to have the opportunity to speak with any of the individuals who made entries into the logbook who are still alive. Sadly, many of my OSR coworkers have passed away, and soon there won't be many of us left. I obtained this aerial photograph of the reformatory as viewed from the west from off the internet several years ago. It was taken around 1985 or 1986. It shows the double F from a different angle, as circled in red with this slide. I cropped this close-up from the previous picture. As with the previous close-up, I apologize for it being somewhat out of focus. In 1985, I was assigned to foot patrol on the second shift, and therefore required to search the buildings to assure that they were empty. Each correction officer had their own method for clearing the furniture factory. The way I did it was to enter the front door, which was the only way one could gain access to the building, because all the other doors were locked from the inside. The front door was locked with a hasp and staple style locking system, similar to the one shown here. Once I entered through the front door, I placed the padlock on a second hasp and staple from the inside, making it impossible for anyone else to enter the building after me. Once the front door was secured, I would climb the 4 flights of stairs to the 4th floor, turning on the lights to each floor as I ascended to the top floor. The light switches were next to the stairwell entrances on each floor. I would then clear each floor by walking through and checking the restrooms, closets, windows, and offices. If it had a lock, I locked it. After I cleared each floor, I turned the lights off for that floor and descended to the floors below until I cleared the first floor and exited through the front door. One day during the summer of 1985, after clearing the building, as I was securing the padlock on the outside of the front door, I happened to look up and noticed that the lights were still on the 3rd floor, as indicated with the yellow highlight in this slide. I knew that I had turned them off, but they were back on, and I had no choice other than to go back in and turn them off again, because had I left them on, my supervisors would have written me up. And we weren't allowed to use the elevator, so I had to run up 3 flights, turn off the lights, run down 3 flights, and then exit. Before securing the padlock on the front door, I looked up and saw that the lights were on the fourth floor. I had no choice other than run up 4 flights of stairs, turn the lights off, and run down 4 flights of stairs, and re-exit the building. And you guessed it, when I looked up from the front doors, the lights were on the second floor. As I re-entered the building, I said the following out loud, and please pardon my French. George, if you're fucking with me, please stop. I have to clear the rest of my buildings, and I don't have time to play games. When I exited the building the fourth time, all the lights were out, and I never had a problem with them again. For those who may be thinking that my coworkers could have been playing a trick on me, I offer the following. My job was to clear the building, and I was very thorough in doing my job. There was absolutely no one in that building after I cleared it. Also, since the padlock was on the outside when I entered the building, and on the inside while I was in it, there is no way anyone could have entered or exited through the only entrance to the building. Also, I knew my coworkers well enough to know that had they been playing a trick on me, none could have gone very long without announcing it to the whole world what they had done. After all, what good is there in playing a trick without telling anyone? And after over 40 years, no one has yet to come clean. My old friend and coworker Mary had a surprisingly similar experience at the Double F while assigned to the third shift during the winter of 1986. Mary was foot patrol and had made rounds in the furniture factory and had turned all the lights off before exiting the building. When she got to the yard area, circled in red in this slide, she happened to look back at the furniture factory and noticed that the lights were on all 4 floors. She walked back to the furniture factory and turned all the lights off again, and like me, had something to say to George. She said, "George, don't you turn these lights on again." And the lights did not come back on. Mary knows that no one had entered the building before her or after her because it had been snowing, and the only tracks in the snow were hers. Another friend and coworker named Mark relayed the following similar personal experience to me, which he experienced on first shift during the early 1980s. While assigned to foot patrol and making rounds in the empty furniture factory on a weekend, he removed some blankets and clothes from the heater. He then walked up the ramp which led from the furniture factory to the textile shop, and then looked around, and then returned to the furniture factory, finding the blankets and clothes had been placed back on the heater. He had only spent 4 or 5 minutes in the textile shop, and both the textile shop and the furniture factory were clear of staff and inmates. What confounded Mark was the fact that there was sawdust on the floor near the heater, and, as with the snow with Mary's incident, there were no footprints in the sawdust other than Mark's. Everyone who worked at the Reformatory knew about and or joked about the ghost named George who allegedly haunted the four-floored furniture factory. But did Gary, George, Mary, Mark, and I experience specific evidence of George the ghost back when the Reformatory was in operation? It's hard to say, but we each definitely have opinions on it. The area that used to be the furniture factory is now part of the parking lot at the Richland Correctional Institution, which has been in full operation since 1998. I know several staff who work there, and none have mentioned anything about the parking lot being haunted. In any event, I hope you've enjoyed this presentation as I have enjoyed presenting it. If you've enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. And this is Ghost Hunter Joe saying goodbye and thanks for watching.